Welcome back, everybody, to this second leg of our event. As you may have noticed during our first panel, we wanted to concentrate, or we wanted to bring together those contributions which were focused mainly on legal aspects of heritage. And I think, as we've already seen, there was very interesting connections among the contributors. So for this second part of our event, we are proposing, or we are presenting four different interventions which deal with more specific case studies about heritage, case studies which are, well, in comparison to some of the others we've already seen, which are more contemporary and which also tend to pose questions related to the way heritage is communicated, the way heritage is distributed, the way heritage is presented to a broader part of the general public, also to the way heritage is musealized through certain state policies or institutions or whatever. So during the first person presenting is Alessandro Paolo Lena, who is PhD student at the University of Bologna, Università di Bologna, and Alessandro Paolo, or Paolo, I don't know.
Alessandro.
Alessandro is going to talk about the theology of the sacred, friars, minor conventuals, consecrated churches in Italy in the 19th and 20th centuries. So, Alessandro, you have the floor. We are very excited about your contribution.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Corredoira and Professor Ramos for this opportunity. I will share my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
We can see it, and as Professor Corredoira said before, yeah, now it's perfect. It's perfect.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I will start presenting the object of my ongoing doctoral research. I'm a first year PhD student here at University of Bologna, and my research investigates the relationship between museum and the sacred space, and focuses on the museological study of consecrated churches managed by the Order of Friars Minor Conventual, so Franciscan friars. Consecrated, let me just do this, okay. Consecrated churches, as well as places of worship of other religions, share with museums some common features in terms of selection, conservation, and display of specific collections. Sacred spaces, in fact, have always been in charge of gathering objects, protecting them, and exhibiting them to the faithful according to the specific practices of a certain religion. And on the other hand, we have to consider that churches are often considered as part of the universal cultural heritage as well. Some of the churches I'm studying are part of the UNESCO list, of course, for their artistic, monumental, and historical values, but also for their intangible components for religious regions, of course. So many collections displayed in Western museums are connected to the category of the sacred, or are expressions of religious practices that can be not only Christian or Catholic, of course, but also non-European or even concerning extinct religions. And once inside the museum, the religious object loses its sacred qualities and participates usually to a different kind of narrative, which can be historical, anthropological, aesthetical as well, which excludes worship. But outside the museum, instead, the disseminated cultural heritage of religious interest has considerable dimensions, especially in Italy, with places of worship of exceptional historical and artistic importance. And in these churches, the devotional and liturgical needs for which they were born and to which they still respond must coexist with the secular fruition, determined by reason of study, education, aesthetic enjoyment, etc., fully legitimate and indeed legitimized for centuries. So the object of my investigation is the specific context, which is often the original one, in which these artworks are, or these historical testimonies are inserted. So the church, recognized not only as a physical container of works of art and historical testimonies, but also as a space, environment, and emotional atmosphere that influences the perception of the observer. So, within the current museological debate on the role of the emotions in engaging the audience through the use of empathic exhibitions, the analysis of churches from a museological perspective, to me, stands as a particularly significant case study, for they can be regarded as immersive experience where works of art or goods of religious interest are set in their original context and maintain the spiritual function for which they were created, along with their historical and artistic value. So, this museological research on consecrated churches has been limited to a significant sample and framed in a historical perspective. The field of investigation has been identified in the churches managed by Friars Minor Conventual in Italy. It's a Franciscan family whose history I am currently studying, starting from the early 19th century. So choosing a religious order, in fact, allows to go beyond the local dimension of the diocese or of the city, and to compare the presences in different geographical realities, maintaining the homogeneity of the sample. So they are, in fact, all conventual Franciscan communities, friaries, which embody the same charism and follow the same regula. The Franciscan order grants a wide range of case studies thanks to the many different kind of churches they actually manage on the dual level of worship characteristic and of ownership and management. So the communities of this order, in fact, include some parish churches owned by the diocese, other which are administered by cultural foundations, so basically already musealized, some still in the possession of the order, others are owned by the Italian Ministry of the Internal Affairs, and there are also two major sanctuaries, one in Padua, St. Anthony, and one in Assisi, St. Francis, which are two of the most important sanctuaries in Europe. So, conventual Franciscan churches constitute a limited yet very significant sample, especially for the presence of some of the most important churches in Italy in terms of both richness of their artistic cultural heritage and importance in the worship sphere. So the chronological limits of the studies are based on a turning point in the history of the order and of its cultural heritage. So the chronological limits of the study are based on a turning point in the history of the order and of its cultural heritage, which is the suppression by the French government during the Napoleonic domination and the subsequent requisition of the works of art in the churches. And the starting point of the historical investigation is actually the restitution of these works from France, because often they did not return to the churches. They were usually displayed in museum, and this is really important to understand the bond between the Franciscan community and their heritage, because they actually became first aware of the importance of these testimonies when these testimonies were taken away from them, and in some cases never restituted. I'll just go a little faster because I'm running out of time. So among the conventual Franciscan churches, some case studies stand out as paradigmatic, either for their artistic and historical value or current management practice. Well, of course, you can see here the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, which is the mother church of the order, is a papal basilica, an important sanctuary, and an important tourist destination as well. Among the others, I would like to at least mention the Basilica of St. Francis in Bologna, because it's owned by the order and it has a really interesting history in the restoration, which was carried out by Alfonso Rubiani in late 19th century. But there's also Santa Croce in Florence, which is administered by a foundation, a cultural foundation, and managed almost entirely as a museum. And of course, as I said before, St. Anthony in Padua, which is one of the most important sanctuaries in Europe, and it was spread from requisitions. So, with regards to the methodology, there are three main levels. So first of all, a theoretical approach that studies the relationship between museum and the sacred, especially in the fields of museology, religious studies, and by religious studies, it's more about material religion and aesthetics, especially for the notion of atmosphere, emotional atmosphere, ambiance in French, with the studies of Gernot Böhm, Tonino Grifero in Italy, and Brooks Begou in France. There's also it's also important to address the museum issues when studying a church on the twofold level of both theory and practice. So there's museography. The investigation on the container-content relation draws also on museographic analysis of those elements inside churches that appear similar to the ones in museum, in order to identify similarities and different with respect with visit features, guided tours, mediation instruments, service offered to the audience, display choices, lighting design, the presence of actual museum spaces such as a treasury museum, and the problem of overcrowding and ticketing, because some churches you actually pay a fee to enter, for example, Santa Croce in Florence. And the historical perspective is fundamental to understand the bond between the friars and their heritage in terms of belonging, identity, and affection. And this is an important feature because most of the studies concern St. Francis or the early century of Franciscan history, while historical research on 19th and 20th century, on the contrary, is fragmented into a series of local studies, which I'm surveying. And there's also, of course, an archival research with the analysis of the documents conserved by the order in their archives, especially the general one in Rome, which is currently closed, unfortunately, and the ones in Assisi and Padua. And very quickly, the objectives. So on the first level, from the theoretical perspective, consecrated churches can be included in the current museological debate on exhibition spaces, questioning the specific ways in which sacred space influences the perception and enjoyment of cultural heritage. Usually, churches are studied from a museological perspective once they are decommissioned, so once they are transformed in museum. I'm really interested in how their atmosphere can influence the fruition of the objects. Then there is the sustainability of the visits, a sustainable enhancement of these churches, which can draw on the study of the museographic devices used inside the churches that can provide instruments to harmonize the needs of the lay audience and the consecrated nature of the place without distorting the sacredness of the place visited. And last but not least, Francesco, in its first presentation, was talking about the 1966 flood in Florence. This is an image of Santa Croce a Franciscan church in Florence in 1966. So it's the study of the bond between communities and places. Usually, it's in the most difficult times of the order that the orders actually became aware of the importance of its heritage. That flood, Assisi's earthquake in 1997, or the Napoleonic domination, for example. So the study of the last 2 centuries of Franciscan history can add the friars' perspective with regards to their heritage, to that heritage that they have been preserving for centuries. Also because in some cases, like Padua and Assisi, even with the suppression of the order, the friars managed to maintain small presences there. So those places will remain consecrated as long as the Franciscan community exists. So thank you. I hope it didn't took too much time.
No, it was perfect. Thank you very much, Alessandro. It was a very interesting presentation, which, as you said, connects to some of the previous ones, and I'm sure it's going to connect with some of the questions which I'm going to be addressed by your next colleagues. I have jotted down some questions I would like to ask you. We may have to do it by the end of all presentations, but I was really interested not only in the way these churches change within this with these new uses, but also what it means for the definition of museum. I mean, you talked about this current museological debates, and I was also interested in so regarding some aspects, as you mentioned, I mean, we're talking about overcrowding. We're talking about immersion, which is sometimes contradicts the traditional experience of the museum. You talk about archive. I thought you were talking about archive related to the historical perspective, but an important part of redefinition, the redefinition of museum today goes through making museums also archives, or presenting their goods as, in our archival way. Anyway, we don't have the time now, but we may have the time later to go on to some of these questions. I found it really interesting. So second contribution comes also from Università di Bologna. In this case, is a combined contribution by Leila Signorelli and Alessia Zampini, and they are going to talk about dissonant, dissonant heritage of war, conservation, and communication of a difficult legacy.
First of all, a brief acknowledge to the one who organized this very useful and full of ideas day. And so thanks to Un'Europa and to the Transnational Research Team for this initiative. Alessia Zampini and I, we are presenting a proposal that we made in the frame of a PRIM project, which is a national funding, where we try to submit this proposal together with other colleagues from Politecnica delle Marche, Chiara Mariotti, and from Politecnico di Torino, Emanuele Morezzi. So we are talking about this project, but we share this project with other colleagues, and we wanted to stress this thing that is multidisciplinary, but also transitional, we can say, proposal that we made. So you see that the title of this proposal is Dissonant Heritage and War, Conservation and Communication of a Difficult Legacy. So this PRIM is based on an innovative idea, at least we hope so, that puts together some concepts expressed by the keywords that are divided into groups. So these are the keywords that describes our proposal. The topic of the proposal concerns the conservation and the communication of dissonant heritage, but the dissonant heritage caused by conflict, both real, so war, and conflict regarding the interpretation. So we want to assess how the communication can influence, or better, how it can affect the conservation of this specific kind of heritage. Here you see some example of what dissonant heritage is, but I think that going through the day, it is quite clear that also other people are sharing these research lines. So these are the example of dissonant heritage, which is a field of research that many of us have in common. The legacy, for example, of totalitarian regimes, as Casa del Fascio is, as other kind of building belonging to that specific age, or for instance also concentration camps. So this kind of heritage is quite clear to all of us that has a dissonance. But the investigation starts from a reflection concerning a new kind of category of dissonant heritage that we are identifying. This research merges some research line belonging to dissonant heritage, so to the Bologna team of architectural restoration, and also some experiences that Alessia Zampini had in Armenia with a specific experience there through an international project. We assume that we are in front to a new raising category of dissonant heritage. What is new in this category? This category is not difficult or dissonant so much by a virtue of a tainted legacy as a concentration camp could be, or a Casa del Fascio could be, but we could say it is apparently a neutral one. So this new dissonant heritage acquires or is acquiring a dissonance through a communication that manipulates the memory, which of course is a stratified memory, but it manipulates the memory and the different layer of the memory with the precise aim of transforming and altering what is an asset into something which becomes a divisive element for the communities rather than a point of cohesion for the identity. So this often happens where we have a fertile ground, we could say, for instance, where tension between social groups have only partially subsided. So in this new dissonant heritage, the manipulation is not linked to a trauma removal, but it is instead purposely distorted to foment feelings linked to nationalism and to open some vulnus in the community. In the production, we could say, of this new dissonant heritage, the virtual platforms such as social media play a fundamental role. And Alessia Zampini is going to give later some example of some new dissonant heritage created by the virtual platforms. So these tools, the digital tools, are characterized by an access which is simplified, less filtered. We know which are the problem of this kind of the potentiality, but also the problem of this kind of media, and they are less filtered compared to official communication channels like press could be. But above all, they have a speed of diffusion and a lack of validation. So every message which is launched through these platforms could reach a wide audience, and particularly among people less accustomed to the use of digital tools or less culturally prepared, and people which are more exposed also to absorb uncritically some content, as the problem of fake news is. So we are seeing that there's a new raising risk for heritage, which comes from the communication. Which are the tactics that we can use. So now I focus on the second group of keywords which describe our proposal, because the second group, while the first group, dissonant heritage, conservation and communication, describe the proposal, the second group talks about the tactics and the strategies we want to display to try and contain this new risk and this new threat. So our methodology is running from some case studies to define which kind of path we can follow. In order to do that, we we are studying and analyzing some successful models, and these successful models are taken also from some association like Atrium Association, so association and the cultural route of Atrium, which provide us some very interesting case study which goes in this direction, and we are trying to study them to identify appropriate tactics that can be used to address the preservation also of this new category of dissonant heritage. As architects, we are not only responsible for the conservation of the material, of the tangible dimension of heritage, but we are also responsible for a cultural supervision aimed at enhancing the value and communicating the meaning of the heritage to the community. So the management of these delicate policies of the communication of the heritage appears to be an innovative challenge, which aimed not only at the protection of the structure and the memory of the past, but also at the search for a new meaning of architecture at the center of the interpretative and semantic conflict. We formulate this idea that we are the Kunstwolle, which is something that Alois Rieck theorized at the beginning of the last century, becomes a Kriegswollen, so a will to influence the value with which heritage is perceived in order to generate war, to generate conflict. So we are trying to frame how the architectural restoration field and the expertise of architectural restoration could provide some tactics, strategies to identify and to avoid the problem that can affect the conservation of this new raising category of dissonant heritage. I could go on with the part of Alessia Zampini.
Yes, I would like just to provide you some insight of these examples that we have seen, that we have monitored during this last month. For example, for what was happening in Ukraine, we see and we testified some, let's say, consolidated action for the protection of cultural heritage. So something that we in some way inherited from the legacy of World War II and even before with the Kunstschutz German institution that was installed and instituted during World War I. So a very long legacy, as for example the starting of first aid squad or the protection of monument thanks to the sand sacks, so something that we were in some way used already to see, that was completely used even in this last war. We can go on next. Or even, for example, the removal and of the main cultural heritage, movable cultural heritage, cultural asset from museums, for example, or from churches to what are considered safe places. So places where this action could be, this asset could be better preserved. But in another, we experience also the increase of a new threat, which was driven by also the new strategy of war, so the warfare. In the next slide, for example, we are going to see how in a war that is now considered the info war, so in this hybrid war where the information can be a great part, like a great weapon for defining and deciding the end and the result of the war, these narratives regarding cultural heritage can be used for legitimize, for example, the expansionist aim of government, or justify the presence in a land, or demonstrate cultural supremacy as well. Just some example. And we need to face this new threat. What happened, for example, when we were working in Armenia and the war between Arts for the Nagorno-Karabakh region, or Artsakh in Armenian terms, breakup started, we immediately saw that a lot of blogs start to pop up on internet run by Azeri historians of art, trying to emphasize a specific period of the history of the monuments that were in that specific region, that were like quested between the rival, the enemies, in order to emphasize, for example, the origin of that specific church or some specific cultural heritage were related more to Azerbaijan people than to the Armenian people. This, what happened, this started a huge debate, a huge even war of information, and also the Armenian cultural institution started to run some Facebook pages because it was the most immediate way to spread, to disprove the affirmation that the Azerbaijan historians were doing. And we saw in the next slide how they started to run this Facebook page, where instead they started to emphasize and to prove how wrong was that theory. So thanks to the history of architecture, they were trying to, let me say, discuss about geopolitics, and in some way the information were strongly acquired a strong political meaning. After that period, but it's not something that affects only, let's say, the information plan, because after this debate, the Azerbaijan government declared the will to institute a commission that would have removed all the Armenian inscription on the church of that site, trying to say and strongly emphasize instead the Albanian or the Azerbaijan origin of that monument. So we see that how strong could be this kind of information, this kind of war of information. In next slides, we see other kinds. These are some of the examples. For example, this is the Shushi Church Cathedral, where they are going to have the removal of the Armenian decoration. And in next, we can go on quickly, just to show you how is strong the power of these new means of communication. This is an official tweet from the U.S. Embassy when the Ukrainian war started, trying to emphasize how, for example, the presence of cultural heritage in Kyiv could demonstrate the cultural superiority of Russian forces. So, which could be would say a funny meme if it would be from another kind of source, but it is the U.S. official embassy. Or, as we are experiencing, even the name and the use of terms could have a very strong role in affecting the relationship between the community and the identity. In fact, in the next slide, we see, for example, how from the 2014, all the page dedicated in Wikipedia to the Ukraine cultural heritage changed the spelling of Kiev, which is coming from Russian culture, to Kyiv, which is instead more related to the Ukrainian right spelling. As a last, these were just some very, let me say, very quick insight in the object of the research that we really would like to try to understand how the international community could monitor the situation and could have a role in balancing and creating tables, round tables, where both the parts can have a role. I was really into the Armenian conflict, and we were trying to have a real debate with our Azerbaijan community, but it was impossible to establish this table. So to strengthen how important it is to have this double perspective, and how to, the other point it could be, we need to understand and try to reflect how we can relate the relationship between community, cultural heritage, and identity in those geographical place where geopolitical conflicts are on the way, where this idea of identity, instead of being like a plus, it's something that became divisive and that can split communities and create conflict. So thank you for your attention, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. To both of you, it's very interesting presentation. Like in two previous cases, I also have a lot of questions. So Esther is going to, he's a colleague from Complutense University here in Madrid, and she's going to talk about contemporary artists' practices, documenting and preserving the fluid.
So, sorry. Okay, I'm ready. So thank you very much, Professors Corradoira and Ramos, and I'm very glad to be here and present my research, which is developed in the Faculty of Fine Arts of the Complutense University of Madrid. And my topic today is contemporary artistic practices, documenting and preserving the fluid. So I would like to talk about the exploration of new methodologies and epistemologies in heritage conservation that are given by the characteristics of current artistic practices, such as conceptual art, sound art, action art, relational art, digital art, environmental art, installation art, and in its broader sense, media art, among others. Related to these practices, we find artworks that are unstable, hybrid, transitory, non-objectual, in general fluid. No, they pose an uncomfortable alteration in the categorical classification systems in museums. In recent decades, it's true that diverse strategies have been developed in the field of conservation restoration of contemporary art, particularly for unstable media, ranging from interviewing the artists to digitalization, migration, reactivation, reinstallation, etc. But there are still huge problems. Where shall we locate the mutable and expansible memories as the documentation that street art or environmental art would need, for example, no? And how can we be sure that we are documenting what is going to be necessary in the future for preserving action art and media art, for example? What do new forms of artistic production implicate in terms of cultural memory, for instance, in sound art or in brainwave art, as I show here? And what do we know about how public experiences it? As a matter of fact, I think museums evidence the unsustainability that implies preserving a whole view of the current artistic practices, and even have serious problems with a more manageable selection of the art produced from the 1960s to the 1990s. Now, when we want to research about the artistic processes of emergent art, that in many cases are highly ephemeral, what we find in museums' archives, in most cases, is amnesia. Well, I understand current artistic processes and practices as an ontological unity of inseparable tangible and intangible agencies. I find that in most cases they are formed by the interaction of material, emotional, spatial, relational, medial, and intellectual agencies. Museums and institutions are usually very aware of the vulnerability that the material dimension contemporary art has, of course, but the efforts do not seem to be equal in relation to the intangible dimension, which is intrinsically linked. So I think that we need to reflect together on the experience of artistic practice and on what is essential to preserve together with the ephemeral object. I feel we are now constructing this object of study and building a heritage for the future. The construction of the memory in the fluency paradigm is a complex process, and so we need to open up a space or space-time, for critical reflection on the present. We need to establish prognosis and visions of what could come, and to make the best decision in present society, even if the future is always an empirical field. So how can we embrace the preservation of current artistic practices? There is no pre-established solution, but I have constated during 2 decades of research that many aspects are systematically left out of the documentation and archival processes. And I just suggest beginning by having a more holistic view. As a starting point, I will take a series of methodological and epistemological foundations. As I said, I understand current artistic practices are a tangible, intangible heritage. This heritage demands a process-centered research approach versus the objective one that has been used all along the 20th century. I think it's also urgent to develop a human-centered conservation theory that complements the artifact-centered stance. We need to study artistic manifestations from the agents, roots, processes, and not, or at least not just from the objectual results. So I propose a bottom-up approach versus the top one, the top-down one. We can integrate performativity and co-research with our objects of study instead of the orthodox idea of objectivity. I think it can help us to avoid the power relationships in the sense of the control of the meanings by experts, no? And I propose the co-production of data and information by various agents. We also take the challenge of transdisciplinary and adisciplinary cooperations. Artists, conservators, restorers, art historians, cultural heritage managers, all of them need to define common interests, methodologies, and also vocabulary. We find that research methods and tools from social sciences also can be very useful, specifically from anthropology and ethnology. And also we can let research methods be influenced by the artistic practices, using creativity as a tool for methodological experimentation. Finally, I would like to consider to put here the necessary methodology related to thick description and documentation. In relation to the theoretical framework, I will foreground a few theories that in my research I found particularly useful. One of them is the new materialismus, specifically the agential realism, the relational philosophy, phenomenology, the actor network theory, the affect theory, aesthetics, of course, the heritage studies, and specifically the critical heritage studies, the memory studies and future studies, and the material culture studies. So we can wonder in this field many things, but I will say that it's necessary to ask ourselves why and for whom do we conserve? What should we conserve in contemporary practices? How should we document and archive them? Who are the agents that should collect data and information? And finally, is it really possible to retain mutable memories? And where could we do it? What is the structure that could retain it? So the most important question for me is how to engage these foundations with practice. And for 15 years, I've been driving research in a theoretical practical framework that pays attention to main 4 values. The first one is the biography or autobiography. Here I want to brainstorm just a few words, a few ideas related to each subject. In the biography and autobiography, I would include the emotional, cognitive, and sociological construction of the autobiography by the artist, her or himself, but also the biographies by other agents, the relevant experiences and influences, the main exhibitions, reviews, interviews, and studies, but also the artist's notebooks, of course, the memories and the life writings. The second one would be the space. which is less studied usually. For instance, this would include the emotional attachment to the place, the phenomenology of the space, the sensorial knowledge, the configuration and use of the artist's studios and labs, the interactions, the materials and artworks storage spaces, the artist libraries, the relaxed spaces. An example of this is the work I was doing for 6 months in the Liquid Things project, documenting the tables, documenting the interactions every day. The third one is the creative process. Here I would include pieces of conversations, notes about the processes in artists' notebooks or other media, of course, aesthetic choices, but also affective experiences, multisensorial knowledge, selection and semantics of materials, the application of techniques, technologies, and apparatuses, and their meanings, the definition of all the agents that take part in a certain artwork, and understanding how do they do it, their complex interactions. And finally, the last one is the time, of course, the artist's considerations about the evolution of the artwork through time, about the evolution of his or her own criteria, the acceptable and situated conservation strategies, the guidelines for future exhibition, the scores for a potential reactivation of the artworks. So if I have 2 minutes more, I would like to talk about my current research in Complutense University. And because I think I consider very important to balance the deficiency of critical perspectives in conservation theory in the higher educational system. So for the last 2 years, until the current day, I'm leading a teaching innovation project in the Faculty of Fine Arts of the Complutense University of Madrid. And there we develop a participatory and horizontal co-research between professional artists, students of conservation and of fine arts, and academics. Its name is Entre Artistas y Restauradores, between artists and restorers, and it's a platform for the critical methodological education, the dialogue, and the visibility of experimental research. We develop this interdisciplinary network, and well, our main goal is documentation of contemporary artistic practices. So we've been working both in the theoretical framework that we want to build through diverse seminars and roundtables, and in the practical experimentation of new forms of transdisciplinary interactions that we have called counter interviews or contraentrevistas. And if you're interested, of course, I could later show you a few examples of this if you want. And as a conclusion, I would say that I'm more interested in hearing your opinions, but from my point of view, I would say that studying the contemporary and current artistic production, especially from the point of view of its processes, takes us to an uncomfortable places and complex questions. We need to reflect or to refract, if we follow Donna Haraway, about what heritage is and how it should be studied and managed. We need to explore new structures of reality, far from the mechanical and predictable vision of the heritage conservation. We need to accept uncertainty and negotiation. And at the same time, we have to be able to generate information and documents that respond to truthful facts. So I think the most important thing now is trying to make the picture more complete, because the omissions, and especially the conceptual and processual dimension of the artworks, makes this heritage vulnerable to ideological manipulation in order to their fast and globalized consumption. And well, conservation of heritage is always a situated knowledge, and I think we have to work in this way. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Esther. Thank you for your contribution. I found it also very interesting. As in the first case, I have jotted down also some questions I would like to ask you. Maybe we can come back later
Okay.
to some of the things you mentioned in order to give time to the other two presentations. I was especially interested in the way you you mentioned these four aspects you must consider in order to these four aspects you are developing in order to rearrange this idea of heritage and the way space, for instance, they're part of it. But anyway, we may go back to these questions at the end of the panel. And so the last presentation comes from two other colleagues from Madrid, who are Pilar Vega Rodriguez and Belén Mainer Blanco. Pilar works at Complutense University and Belén at University Francisco de Vitoria. And they are also talking about presentation, dissemination of heritage, in this case, literary heritage. And they are going to talk about specific case studies, an internet platform, if I get it right, that is called Descubre Leyendas, and it's about its educational uses. So Pilar and Belén, please, you have.
Good afternoon. Can you
floor.
hear me?
Yeah,
fine?
we can hear you. Yeah.
I'm gonna share.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Well, I will be speaking on behalf of Pilar Vega, which is the main researcher, and I am Belén Mainer, and I will be presenting our project, which is the Animation of Literary Heritage, the platform Descubre Leyendas and Cultural and Educational Uses. So we are a research group which is called Electrum, and the areas that we cover is literature studies, creative writing, culture, and media. Our main researcher is Professor Pilar Vega Rodriguez, and as you can see, we are 6 researchers in this group. University Complutense de Madrid is the one the project depends on. So this is the university that leaders us, and the other researchers come from Universidad Francisco de Vitoria, University de Oviedo, and Université de Lorraine, which is in France. And all of us are, we work together, and we had 2 projects. These are 2 national ones in Spain. One was given in 2013, and the other one was given in 2018. We wanted in the first project, the one we worked in, it was a 3-year, 4-year project, to work to spread dynamization of literary heritage, and this was the main our main central literary source were our legends, the Spanish legends. And we wanted to spread them because we realized that many of our legends were just had been forgotten. So we wanted to work with them and to spread them in the new digital media and channels of communication. And we didn't want them to do it in a very general way. We wanted to do it in a rigorous way through research. So that's the purpose of the 2 projects. In the first one, as I was explaining, we wanted to search and to work hundreds of legends, and that's what we did. It was an enormous work done, and we are really proud of the work that we have done, and you can have it, I will show you later, in our website, which is called descubreleyendas.es. And then in the second project, now that we had all those hundreds of legends worked and accessible to all publics, to everyone. We wanted to do something kind to get to know the legends through different channels, and we started to do books. We started to do, as I will show you later, also not only the web, but we geolocalize our legends, and finally we worked in a video game, and this video game has been recently published, and I will show you later some of the work. So this was our start point. It was not a very aesthetic start point. This is what we found out when we went to the newspapers, to the libraries, to the books, to the different records, and so others in Spain. And we had, and we still have, many researchers that gave us access to these legends. Some were published in some interesting webs like Hispana, Biblioteca Digital Hispánica, Europeana, Archivos.org, or others weren't that accessible, so we had to go in person to sometimes very little towns in Spain, but we always had doors open, so we could look after these legends that we wanted to modernize and to get to everyone interested on them. And once we got to this text, we wanted to do, as I said, a very rigorous work. So the first step that we took after finding all those legends was to sum the text. And our main criteria was the narrativity. We wanted this text to be desirable. We wanted to be evocative. We wanted them to evoke the imagination of the ones who could reach them, and we wanted also to revitalize our traditions, that these legends were precisely that. They have a sum of really interesting traditions, Spanish traditions, and through literature they have gone through the time, and we wanted to modernize all those texts. And we wanted to sum lots of text, and we found out that in Spain there's a lot of text, very plurality of the text that we found, and we wanted better aesthetic for quality for this text to be shown, and the inclusion of all the languages in Spain. We are rich in language, and we want, so some of these legends that we found are in Spanish, others are in Catalan, others are in Basque, Gallego, so you can find different legends in different languages too. And we tried to get to two different publics. One was a general one, so we wanted to reach them by modernizing the spelling. Some of the texts had a very old Spanish and not very easy to read or to understand, so we wanted to touch some of the grammatical errors and to explain with sometimes visual explanations the text and the purpose of them, of the traditions and the identity that we can find through this literature. And but not with we didn't like, or we didn't wanted to manipulate or censor the text, but just to do critical notes so we can open-minded this understanding of these legends. So as I said, we had to modernize archaism, technical language, saying, sociocultural, historical contents, because legends are from the 10th century till 20th century, so a lot of time has passed, and some things cannot be understood correctly today that happened in the past. So we wanted to explain all these things that we can find in these legends, and then we wanted also to reach a specialized public So we attached bibliography, we referenced other texts that would be interesting to these legends too, to other researchers that are studying this also. And we wanted to attach also work of other research documents and illustration that has been done in the area. So, clarifying the gaps, it was important for us, the historicity, the chronology, the geopolitical distribution, and to answer all the questions that perhaps someone could have meanwhile they're reading all this interesting text for us. And we found out that we had a very we had an historical gender in these legends, traditional and original. Some were in verse, some were in prose, and we could find out that they inspired by traditions with many components of heroic tone and some nostalgic. And that's perfect for narrative, because you know that when something is worth telling, heroines are heroes are really interesting for us to do or to get these legends to the public in general. And we found out very interesting passage of lyricism and recourse to the marvelous. You know, these legends first were told in an oral tradition. The trovador went town to town, and only the things that people memorized and really excited them were the things that then survived in the text. So we have marvelous, heroism, lyricism, and these texts really are interesting for narrative purposes. Once we had these hundreds of legends worked out, and we were in, because all the researchers were really fascinated with the work that what we were doing, and people were really interested and helping us a lot. So we're really grateful for that. We wrote 2 books and some many articles of our past, and we wanted to do a very general one where we could find legends of all Spain and the purpose of our project. And then we decided to choose legends in Avila. Avila is close to Madrid. It's a very interesting city in Spain, and they have really fascinating legends. So we really wanted to do something there in Avila, so we started by publishing a book. And this is our website, descubreleyendas.es. It's open, so anyone can enter and have access to very rigorous texts of legends. You can find them in a very different ways. You can search for them. You can know us, the legends. As you can see, in every legend, you can have the stars, so you can valorate them, and you will have access to videos, to by links, by hypertext or by hypertext, and you can have and go and navigate through videos to other texts from the same authors. So you can have a very rich navigation through descubreleyendas.es. And well, we've gone to many cities. The last one was in the town hall of León, and well, they were really young creatives, and they were really fascinated about one legend that they didn't know, even though they have been born in León, which was the Anillo de la Muerta. So they started to find out all this information. It's a very simple legend, but now they are doing something about this ring of the death in León, because they found out through our website this legend that captured their attention. As you can see, you can find the legends through the different areas in Spain. So you can find it by communities or provincias or cities. So it's very concrete. As I say, we did not only wanted to have a website and geolocalize. You can have it in your mobile too. We wanted to do something else, and you have seen the text that we found at the very beginning in newspapers. Well, this is something that you can find in Google. in Android. It's a 10-hour video game. It's called Caminos Legendarios, the Legendary Path. And this is a video game where you can play 6 of these Legends of Avila. You will take the role of Jimena Blázquez. For us, it's a heroine from the low middle age. And sometimes we get to know very well the American West, but in Spain there was something very similar in the low middle age. The people from the north, as Jimena was, went down Spain with the little they had, and they started to conquer, that we call it La Reconquista, all this peninsula that we live actually. And Jimena and her family arrived to Avila when she was a little girl, and during her whole life she can live 6 legends. In the legends, you will as a player get to know all these legends by playing them. These are the 6 episodes that the video game has. We start when they arrive to Avila and they settle in Avila. As I said, it's very similar as the American Western, but it's the Spanish Western. And well, it was not easy for them, so they had to do and work together. And then there were mayors, and of course, as the natural as humans, they started to fight who was going to be the mayor and how the wall was built. Something about queens and king. You can have the princess, the Muslim princess that everyone, well, 2 men were in love with her, and this was fatal in the Avila from low medieval age. And finally, we will have this Jimena. Jimena, when she gets old, and this is very interesting from the video game because there's not many video games that are the main character is an old woman, and this game is characterized. The main character is the old Jimena Blázquez that has to defend the city from the Muslim attack. And we have just, well, you can find, this is the young Jimena. You can find them, she grows up, and you can have the old Jimena. And we used procedural rhetoric, and well, I have a colleague in Copenhagen, it's Egenfeld, and he did very studies about memorability. When people play, how much of the content that they have played can memorize. And this is something that is very good in video games because we increased in an 8% of our memories about what we have learned if we compare it with other media. So when we are playing, we memorize after the time, we memorize more than with other media.
Please, Belen, with
yes.
the time.
It's okay.
It's okay.
I can finish. Okay.
No, well, no, you have. I mean, you have just, but maybe think about. I mean, we are already over time, so think.
Okay, I can finish in. This is the game, the gender, first person, and you can find it in mobile. And then you have to have the nobility, the clergy, and the people very in a good mood if you want to pass the game. And you can have a diary mode where you can find more information meanwhile you are playing. And we went to Avila, to the downtown, and we are working in other uses like tourism uses about through the game. We can do this in Avila with tourism, and we are working on it. This is something that other games have done in a very successful way, like Age of Empires or Assassin's Creed, that could explain to other students, to our students, many of the architecture and history and data of ancient civilizations through games. And this was very effective in the pandemic, in the lockdown. And well, we can offer also some didactic units. You can find them in the books, and we have worked a lot through the game and through our legendary, how we can find many learning uses from our legends. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Belen. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you also to Pilar, although she's not here.
She's connected. Sorry, okay. Because perhaps you think that she's not, but she's connected. But okay. I was the one who was talking.
You were the one presenting. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you also, Pilar. Now that you're here. So, as I said, I have some things I would like to comment with you all. But maybe before it, I would like to open the discussion round. I don't know if anyone would like to say something, to ask some things about what we have just heard.
May I say something about Fernando?
Yeah. I don't know.
No, just a comment. I enjoyed all the lectures in both two panels, and I have a general question, a general issue. I don't know. I think it's too general, likely, but just to discuss with you because it's not my field of research. So. Yeah. Hearing the lecture of Esther, but I am not sure to understand all. But I'd like to know about this concept of fluid art, no? And I don't know, but it's possible that this kind of art borns to disappear, to fastly disappear, no? So the concept of the conservation and preservation, especially in such fast-paced worlds, no? What does it mean? What does in a world where all is so quickly consumed, no? What does it mean? I think it's a general question, but is an issue related to the conservation in general, especially in our period, in our time.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible to reply.
I don't know if I can answer, but thank you very much for the question, because this is also something that I asked to myself. And I would say that I was researching from the beginning about the use of water in contemporary art. It was my doctoral thesis, because I wanted to go to the problem of the semantics of matter, of the fluid, no, something that I was feeling as an art historian and conservator restorer in this point of common. I was feeling that there were many things that were lost, and I just could say that in museums of contemporary art, we tend to develop scientific studies and methodological practices that are related to the object. And also these studies usually are related to the objects. So what I would like to point out is that we cannot just preserve this. We cannot put all the energies in developing the scientific, chemical, biological, physical studies to preserve the object, because there are many other things that are absolutely fluid, that are inherent to the object, that are absolutely lost. And I think this is a politically problematic.
Yes, sure. I understand. I agree. But I think that technologies may help also in your field, especially take into account the artificial intelligence and so on. I think that it could be a future also for this field.
What I feel, Maria, is that from the contemporary art production, we can look from these problems. We can look to the rest of artistic heritage, because the problems that we can see in this field are not exclusive from this field, but we can look from this to the all the rest of the production. So maybe it's interesting to go to the earth, no?
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't want to impose myself on the discussion, but I just had some comment on these subjects you were mentioning at the end, Esther, and also Maria Giovanna, because I was wondering. I mean, yes, I mean, of course we can and we should learn a lot from contemporary art and contemporary art preservation and the questions you're posing in order to look back at another stages of history. But at the same time, I have the impression that the way you describe these new ways of dealing with heritage are well, you're talking about a way of dealing with heritage which is very integrated in the production of the work. I mean, you're talking about dealing with the artist. We're talking about considering the spaces, recording, or considering also the process. So that means if you're thinking historically, there are a lot of questions you can answer through this methodology. And at the same time, I think there are also some ethical questions that are also interesting. I mean, you are being more or less part of the production. So I think that's also a thing, some aspect you have to consider. And another question was, well, you were asking at the beginning what is essential, and your presentation was a cry out for opening up beyond the objects, beyond the tangible. But at the same time, I mean, we all know museums or archives are always making a selection. So it's not only about opening up, it's also making a selection and asking what is not essential about it. So when do we stop gathering material? Where is how do we approach these practices that are beyond the object? And what is important or not? I mean, those are very theoretical questions, but those were the thoughts that went through my head as I heard you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. I think I don't know, I agree with you, because the archives, as I also said, are unsustainable. Because if we go to environmental art, you have to document its piece every 2 months. I mean, it's crazy. But what I feel, if it can help somehow, is that the big loss is the part related to the processes. This is what I wanted to point out. There are such a lot of meanings that are being lost. That maybe this is what I feel that could be complemented.
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, this may be just a little, it's a little thought, but at the same time, there are a lot of meanings which are generated at the moment and shouldn't be generated in another moment or another context. So another question would be if part of this art doesn't want to be recuperated or doesn't want to be part of the archive. So, but anyway, that's very
yeah, it's also a question that we can use to bank arts, for example, no?
Yeah.
Not just for digital art.
Yes.
So thank you.
No, you're very welcome. It was very, very interesting. Any other questions? Maybe to the other participants. Yeah, Loreto is.
Yeah, just want also to say that I like it a lot, the fourth presentation. I have a comment on the Leila and Alexia work. I found very interesting the link you did among the use of heritage as a weapon of misinformation. Because I teach also issues related to fake news. But I don't know if you have any other study besides the one of Kiev that you can share with us, or do you think that is something that happens usually when there is a war and there is a extraordinary covering of social networks communication?
So we notice that this phenomenon is growing, is rising and is growing, and is something really contemporary because it belongs to, as InfoWar and fake news, it's brand new, we could say, in some way. So through our analysis, we are trying to face this kind of question. So the question that you made, it is the core of our research. So with an answer, and we clearly understood that there's something going on. So Kiev is one of the examples, but also the Armenian studies that Alessia was showing. So this kind of neutral, I told, heritage, so that it's not dissonant at its core, we could say, at Cabo del Pacho or a concentration camp could be. And it's something that is dealing with an interpretative conflict. It belongs to this very wide field of difficult heritage, of the dark tourism also. So it tries to put together and try to understand this phenomenon in a more wide view that try to give solution to a new risk, as ICOMOS, for example, is always listing the kind of risk that threaten our heritage. We dare say that this is a new kind of risk, so it is something that we can add to that list that seems to be closed, but it is evolving. So apart from the example of the very most contemporary conflict we are dealing with, we started to study, for example, some heritage which is undergoing right now this kind of resignification. For example, the Sarajevo Library, because Sarajevo Library was a symbol of the war in the ex-Yugoslavia territory. But it was also a symbol of the reconstruction. It is a symbol of the conflict which still are going through after the reconstruction for the way they treated this library. And as we are always trying to trace and to detect also this kind of cross-cutting issues, it was one of the first, or maybe the first monument which was projecting the Ukrainian flag on its facade. So this heritage, which is not right now at the center of conflict, but it has been recently at the center of conflict, and how they treated it and how they dealt with it. So we are studying also this very recent one, but also some more ancient one, because as you may already know, for example, all the heritage, architectural heritage, which is a witness of a technology, has been, we can say, neglected for a lot of years. And also in the city where we work, so in Bologna, but also in Cesena, in Forlì, we have a lot of examples of very, we can say, also outstanding buildings that were neglected, that were abandoned due to the origins linked to the fascist regime, and they are undergoing a transformation and resignification during these years. So it's something very new, and we are trying to detect all these very, we can say, hotspots of things that seems to go in the right direction, to try and understand how we can address also the risk that is undergoing in this new and very recent conflict, and try to understand how we can trace and display tactics and strategies to contain this risk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Esther?
if I can
Yes.
add.
Yes, sure, Alessia, sorry.
Something to Leila. because I don't know, I like very much your presentation, and I found that you have a very big responsibility, and also with the other risks like the tourism that can be derived later from this heritage, no? And I'm driving now a master thesis that is going to finish also about this dissonant heritage related to the exhumed remains of the Spanish Civil War. And we got in contact with, well, he's a friend of me, David Varela, which was the director of the Documenta Madrid, and he's presenting tomorrow his last film, Un cielo impasible, which is related to this. So maybe also this other point of view, which is not exactly from the media, but from the cinema, no, from the documentary, which is more credible sometimes, no. But I don't know what impressions do you have from this information that we also have. And I don't know, I just suggest you, if you are interested in putting you in connection with David, which is a very nice person. I think he would love to know you. And thank you very much.
I think it will be amazing to be.
And I leave also. I will let Alessia answer, because also about the thing that we want to use documentary and movie to better understand this heritage. So she will tell you something.
Yes, it will be very nice and very interesting to us, because even in this project we have in some way foreseen the creation of some documentary, and more like a media for like spreading the result of the research, but we are really interested into this kind of perception, which is not on that can be more accessible even to the more general public, let's say, because we noticed that we are in some way very linked to technical information, and instead this kind of media could be even if they are artistic reinterpretation, of course, because even a director of a documentary have his own, let's say, cut to the perspective, but they can be very interesting.
So, it's about the importance of students in the high school about the common graves of Brunete, which was the most of the important areas in Spain. And nowadays they are opening new common graves in Brunete, so we are just in the moment of recording, and it's very, very interesting. I will connect you.
Yes, thank you so much. It will be very, very interesting to us. And even for just adding something to the previous question, we of probably one of the main case that happened when this misinformation and this, let me say, different perspective and point of view that led to the destruction of a very important cultural heritage was probably the Mostar Bridge, where in that case, exactly because it was the symbol of a plurality of society, of communities that were in a city, the bridge was used as a deliberate target and destroyed because it was charged of that meaning of being like a bridge between cultures. So the war wanted exactly to destroy that power, that symbol of the war. And there is one last very recent research from NATO, which is a kind of, let me say, guideline for people operating in cultural heritage field, that strongly recommend as to the operators, to soldiers, when they enter into a conflict region, to try to understand what could be the different perspective the different communities have on specific monuments or sites, just to understand if there could be a potential misinformation and political use of the history of that monument for increasing the, let me say, the distance and between the people and the conflict. So it's but it's a very fresh new, let's say, topic even for the military, that are, let's say, just saying, okay, you have to pay attention to that, but understanding how to do and how the let's say, academia can help in this part could be a real challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to act as a dictator at this point, but I think we have reached our time, slowly but surely. If there is any other question, of course, this could be.
No, I had a question, but it's too late. So I think that it was just a general issue. So I ask directly to Francesco Paolo Cunzolo, because it's a question related to the Faro Convention and the impact of the Faro Convention on Europe. So I'll ask directly to him because now I think it's too late.
It is yeah, it's slowly time. Or we may have the question, or we may put the question in the drawer for the next seminar.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. It was, at least from my side, it was a great experience, and I hope you all got something from this almost 4 hours here together. Is it right? Yeah. So. Yeah, I'm very happy that you stayed up until the end, and I just want to thank you also. Thank you also Loreto Corredora, who was also part of this committee or whatever group. And especially, I would like to thank you all for your presentations, which were really, really, really interesting. I've learned a lot. I think each one of us takes a little bit from the others home. So. Yeah, I don't know what else I can say.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
I
thank you.
enjoyed a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Francesco. I call you.
Bye bye. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Good night, Professor.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.